Okay, so the mayor of New York City just doxed thousands of wealthy people. Like actually posted their full names and home addresses on the internet in a searchable Excel file. And his defense was essentially, yeah, we did that. State law required it. Here's the spreadsheet. His name is Zoran Mamdani. He is 34 years old. His mom is Mira Nair, the director of Monsoon Wedding in Mississippi Masala. His dad is a renowned academic. He grew up between Uganda and New York, and he is currently the most chaotic elected official in America, and I mean that as a compliment. He became mayor of New York City on January 1, 2026, after winning the Democratic primary against a field that included the actual sitting mayor Eric Adams, who had been indicted on federal corruption charges and still almost won. Let that sink in. A man under federal indictment for allegedly accepting bribes from foreign governments almost won the Democratic primary for mayor of New York City in 2025. He got 21% of the vote while under indictment. New York is not a normal place. Mamdani won that primary by running a campaign that was so far left it made most of the Democratic establishment visibly uncomfortable. He promised free bus rides citywide, funded by congestion pricing revenue. He promised universal free childcare for every child under 5 in New York City. He promised to build 200,000 new units of affordable housing in 4 years. He promised to tax the wealthy so aggressively that his opponents, both Republican and Democrat, warned it would trigger a mass exodus of rich people from the city. His response to the exodus argument was essentially, okay. He won by 14 points. So this is the context you need before we get to the Excel file. The pied-à-terre tax. A pied-à-terre is a French term meaning literally a foot on the ground, used to describe a small apartment or secondary home that wealthy people keep in a city they don't primarily live in. New York has a lot of these. More than any other city in America probably. Hedge fund managers from Greenwich who need to be in Manhattan 3 days a week. Tech billionaires from Silicon Valley who want a place to stay when they come for meetings and galas. International investors, particularly from China, Russia, and the Gulf states, who buy Manhattan condos as assets the same way you might buy a stock, holding them as stores of value with no intention of actually living there. These properties are often completely empty for most of the year. A $30 million apartment in Tribeca where someone spends 11 days annually. A penthouse on the Upper East Side that gets used for 2 weeks in October and then sits dark and empty from November through August. Meanwhile, the people who actually live in New York full-time, who work there, who send their kids to school there, who use the subway and the parks and the hospitals, are competing for housing in a market where tens of thousands of units are effectively off the market because someone in Hong Kong bought them as an investment. The argument for the pied-à-terre tax is that these properties generate almost no tax revenue relative to their value because they are classified as second homes, not primary residences, and get taxed accordingly. A hedge fund manager's $15 million pied-à-terre generates less property tax than a middle-class family's house in Queens. Mamdani and Governor Kathy Hochul pushed through a tax that applies to non-primary residences in New York City worth more than $5 million. The tax ranges from 0.5% to 4% of the property value annually depending on how expensive it is. If you own a $10 million apartment in Manhattan that you use for 3 weeks a year when you're in town for meetings, you are now paying somewhere between $50,000 and $400,000 a year in additional taxes on it. The real estate industry had been fighting a version of this tax for years. It came close to passing under previous mayors and kept getting blocked. Mamdani got it done in his first 6 months. Before he even announced the list, Mamdani was out here in full villain arc mode. On April 15, 2026, tax day, he posted a video on X. He is standing outside 220 Central Park South, which is one of the most expensive residential buildings on Earth, home to various billionaires including Ken Griffin, who paid $238 million for an apartment there and is famous for being opposed to taxes on people like Ken Griffin. Mamdani walks up to the building, looks directly into the camera, and says, "When I ran for mayor, I said I was going to tax the rich. Well, today, we're taxing the rich." Then he taps on the camera lens with his finger. The video got millions of views. Ken Griffin's spokesperson did not comment. Then on July 23, 2026, Mamdani posted again. "If you have a second home in New York City worth more than $5 million, check your mailbox when you're back in the 5 boroughs, because you've got mail." He sent notification letters to property owners telling them the pied-à-terre tax was coming. And then his Department of Finance uploaded the list. The list of all properties in New York City that could be subject to the new tax, along with the full names and addresses of every owner, in a searchable Excel file, on the internet, for anyone to look at. 960,000 entries. Anna Wintour is in there. Former editor of Vogue. Address listed. Woody Allen is in there. Address listed. Various hedge fund managers, real estate developers, and international investors. All listed. All with addresses. The New York Post described it as effectively doxing thousands of wealthy New Yorkers. Republicans called it reckless and foolish. Even a Democratic strategist went on a podcast and said it was stunning and irresponsible. Real estate groups said it created serious privacy and safety risks. Someone on X pointed out that the list dropped just days after a terrorist attack and said the timing was insane. The city's response was extremely calm about all of this. A Department of Finance spokesperson said, as per state law, a property roll was released for public inspection. Which is technically true. When a new tax is enacted in New York, the DOF is required by state law to publish the list of potentially affected properties for public inspection. This has happened with previous taxes. The difference is that previous tax lists were usually published in dry government documents that nobody read. Mamdani's team uploaded it as a searchable Excel file, announced it on social media, and the mayor personally posted, "You've got mail," to taunt the people on it. The law required the list to be published. Nobody required it to be easy to search. Nobody required the mayor to tap on a camera lens outside a billionaire's apartment first. That part was a choice. And it is the choice that makes this a rise and ruin story rather than just a boring tax policy update. Because what Mamdani is doing is not just collecting more tax revenue from wealthy property owners. He is running a specific political strategy that uses public shaming and information transparency as pressure tools. The logic goes like this. Rich people who own empty apartments in Manhattan are unpopular with the voters Mamdani needs to keep on his side. Making those rich people visible, putting their names and addresses on a public list, making it easy for journalists, activists, and ordinary New Yorkers to look up who owns the empty luxury condo on their block, creates political pressure that a tax bill alone does not create. A tax is a financial instrument. A searchable database of who owns what is a social instrument. It changes the conversation from, "the city is raising taxes," to, "here is the specific person who owns a $12 million apartment in your neighborhood that sits empty while you pay $3,500 a month for a studio." It makes the abstract concrete. And it gives Mamdani's base something to be angry about with a face and an address attached. This is not a new political playbook exactly, but he is executing it with a level of social media savvy that most politicians who are 34 years old in 2026 do not have. He understood that posting, "You've got mail," and tapping on Ken Griffin's building would get him more coverage than a press conference at City Hall ever could. He understood that the Excel file going viral was actually the point. Every news story about whether the list was reckless is also a news story about who is on the list and why. Every debate about the safety concerns is also a debate about whether wealthy people who own empty apartments in a housing crisis deserve to have their addresses known. He engineered the conversation. And he keeps winning it. Whether you think this is brilliant political strategy or dangerous government overreach depends almost entirely on whether you are the kind of person who owns a Manhattan pied-à-terre or the kind of person who cannot afford to live in Manhattan at all. The people who own the apartments are very upset. The people who cannot afford to live in Manhattan are, by many accounts, pretty entertained. There are also legitimate concerns underneath the political theater. The list of 960,000 entries is significantly larger than the 10,000 to 15,000 properties city officials had previously estimated would be subject to the tax. The city council minority leader pointed out that thousands of properties on the list probably do not qualify as second homes and their owners will be disputing their inclusion. Which means people who are not actually wealthy second homeowners may have had their names and addresses published in an Excel file on the internet as potential tax targets. That is a real problem that is not fixed by saying state law required it. The law required publication. It did not require publishing people who are not actually subject to the tax. There is also the safety question. New York in 2026 is a city that recently saw a high-profile targeted killing of a corporate executive. The Luigi Mangione case and the United Healthcare CEO murder were fresh in everyone's minds when this list dropped. Multiple people on social media explicitly referenced that case when commenting on the Mamdani list. The city's response to those concerns has been that the information is legally required to be public and that property records are already technically accessible. Which is true but also slightly beside the point. Making something technically accessible in a government archive is different from uploading it as a clean searchable Excel file and announcing it on X after your mayor posts a video tapping on a billionaire's camera. The searchability and the framing are the thing. And Mamdani knows that. This is a man who ran his entire mayoral campaign on the idea that the wealth gap in New York is a crisis and that the people responsible for it should be visible and accountable. The Excel file is the Excel file. But it is also an extension of that political project. Make the rich visible. Make their holdings searchable. Make it easy for ordinary people to understand exactly who owns what in the city they cannot afford to live in. And then tax it. Whether the courts ultimately let the tax stand is still being worked out. Real estate groups have filed challenges. The legal questions about how pied-à-terre taxes interact with existing property law are genuinely complicated. But while the lawyers fight about it, Mamdani is out here posting, "You've got mail," to billionaires on X and filming himself outside $238 million apartments on tax day. And somehow he keeps winning the news cycle every single time. His mom made monsoon wedding. He is out here running New York City like it is a political performance art piece. And the most insane part is that it is actually working. Rise and ruin. Every time.